this Ben Shapiro video was circulating a little bit yesterday. He responded to a viewer question. I guess he was doing some sort of Q&A, so it's an informal setting. And the viewer asked actually a fairly decent question for a viewer that's probably on the conservative side about how alleviating child poverty should be a goal, and that school lunches might help solve that goal. But here's Ben Shapiro answering the question, kind of dismissing that seemingly obvious point by one of his viewers.
If government can protect kids from the sick radical left, shouldn't they also protect kids from hunger? Wouldn't it make sense to strengthen food stamps and have school lunch be free, since some kids are in school lunch debt? Well, I mean, if you are a parent, school lunches are not going to solve the problem.
Pause it for a second. I want to thank that obvious person who's not a right winger pretending to be a right winger by saying framing that question exactly how they did. You know, if conservatives are so busy battling the woke left or whatever they said, why can't they also fight hunger and help expand food stamps? That's not a conservative sending that question.
No. I disagree with you completely, Bender. I mean, I think that shows that these people who watch some of his programming, they're brainwashed into thinking that the left is coming with groomers for your kids, and they still sometimes occasionally have a thought that's a bit more tethered to common sense, and he's about to shit on it. But
expanding food,
but that's his role.
I don't know about that.
They might just know They might just know a hungry child. I mean, a lot of conservatives really think that compassionate conservatism is a real thing that can really exist, because they sometimes see it manifest in people who call themselves conservative on a personal level in their lives, being nice to them, and don't realize that once you get higher and higher in the government, that's just not. It's just, again, it's a grift.
I think that's a good point, because I think a lot of people think that like the average Republican voter is like worse than the actual like politicians in power, and I actually don't think that's true.
No.
The average
I also
Republican
don't think they're pro expanding any sort of social safety net programs.
Well, they might be
school lunches though.
They might, but school lunches, that doesn't seem tied to like anything that the Democrats are pushing on a national level, or at the very least the straw man of like what the Democrats and the left represents in their mind when they tune into the Daily Wire. So they might just like not have an awareness of who's on which side on that front. But let's just watch the clip, because I think the more important kind of endpoint is how Shapiro tries to steer this viewer away from that thought.
If government can protect kids from the sick radical left, shouldn't they also protect kids from hunger? Wouldn't it make sense to strengthen food stamps and have school lunch be free, since some kids are in school lunch debt? Well, I mean, if you are a parent, school lunches are not going to solve the problem of child hunger at any serious level. If there is a problem of children actually starving, that is a child endangerment scenario in which CPS needs to be called. If you're talking about like actual child starvation, the truth is it does not take that much money to feed a child. I know I have 3 of them. You should be feeding your child before you feed yourself. Yeah. It's that simple.
And so it's a personal.
There's a much deeper problem at work than school lunches if kids are legitimately starving.
Fuck this piece of
Yeah. So that is it is a personal failing on your part. If your child is starving, you should either have Child Protective Services called on you, or it doesn't take that much money to feed a child, he says. That's what
I want to get to the mind of this intellectual titan of the right wing. So according to him, it doesn't take much money to feed a child, like you just said. And that's what he said. But instead of solving that very affordable, cheap issue, instead we're going to take the child and have to provide them with shelter as well, babysitting services. Someone's got to watch these kids that you take, and also feed them not just lunch, but then also breakfast, dinner, and the various other snacks and meals they eat throughout the day too. Very, very, very astute. Very into.
But I thought he was Mr. Facts and Logic. No, quite literally, if they have one meal provided for them at their school, where they're there presumably 5 days a week, that would take a meaningful hit into child hunger. But this pairs back with what he'd been saying about how there's actually nobody that dies of hunger in the United States. Right? That was the clip that we covered of his. No one dies of starvation in the United States, or no one dies of. There's no such thing as a living wage, is what he said, or non-living wage. And so he relies on like a semantic point in that case to discount the notion that poverty in any meaningful way exists in the United States. That one is like, he's using semantics. This is just complete stupidity. I mean, obviously anybody who listens to this.
No, I'm sorry to disagree with you guys, but this is demonic. But this is the rationale that's been underpinning society for like hundreds of years. Like hunger is valuable to people. The hunger is valuable to the powerful. Go back to it's like the 1700s, where Joseph Townsend, a colleague of Malthus, who thought there were people were overeating and we need to do population control, said this: hunger will tame the fiercest animals. It will teach decency and civility, obedience and subjection to the most perverse. In general, it is only hunger which can spur and goad the poor on to labor. Yet our laws have said they shall never hunger. The laws it must be convinced. So like that we can't be looking for logic in this. He is.
Yes, I'm only doing that rhetorically to deconstruct his branding as Mr. Logic.
Yes, exactly. But I'm saying like the rationale is actually very clear, which is this. Whereas hunger is not only so he says like hunger is not only peaceable, silent, unremitting pressure, but as the most natural motive to industry and labor, it calls forth the most powerful exertions. And when satisfied by the free bounty of another, lays lasting and sure foundations for goodwill and gratitude. The slave must be compelled to work, but the free man should be left to his own judgment and discretion. Should be protected in the full enjoyment of his own, be it as much or little, and punished when he invades his labor's property. So like this is just like you can't say this publicly,
yes,
but this is the actual logic that runs Western civilization.
Is that hunger, some level of hunger is useful to society, which is why, and just really quick, Brandon, it's notable that we were able to keep millions of children out of poverty and out of starvation during COVID, because we actually expanded school lunches during that time period. It did reduce hunger tangibly by multiple percentage points in this country, and we chose not to do that anymore. So to back up Matt's point, it is a choice. Shapiro just can't say that. So his attempts to sound logical there, you heard the cracks, because he's not able to say what he actually means on that front, is that a certain level of hunger and insecurity is what we need in capitalism.
Yeah, they want more of it. Like that's why like things like the child tax credit or SNAP, they expire, leading to more hunger, and they act like this is all just natural policy. No, they like the hunger. They like people being deprived of things because they don't want people fed by the state or public institutions like schools. They want them fed by bosses, or they want them to starve to death.
More than anything, they want to expand that to your children, too, because they know that a lot of people might choose to, in a personal situation, go without. But when they don't have kids, like he said, CPS comes in, and I know everyone, or at least he wants to frame CPS as the good guy and people want to frame as the bad guy. But they're a necessary part of a society where we just don't provide for resources, broadly speaking, for children. And we just have to do it piecemeal like we do everything else, because the solution is we could just provide free lunch for all kids. And that would just be another way to get money into the hands of pockets. I mean, money into the hands of parents who otherwise need it. But instead, we have to have children live in a type of, precarity, because it makes their parents better workers. It makes their parents more likely to stay together. It makes their parents more, or at least in their mind it does. It makes their parents more likely to go to work and not complain because they have mouths to feed at home. But, ultimately, it's just very, bleak. It's very bleak to be in a society where like we can afford all this stuff for, weapons of mass destruction abroad, and obviously it's not a reference specifically to Ukraine, but for all the other regimes we choose to spend that money on and not feed our children. I think it's understandable that a real conservative, or just like a normal person who describes themselves as conservative, would be like, that's what is your excuse for this? How come we can't do it? And all Ben Shapiro can just do is deny the reality that, it's happening, that feeding the kids at school would have any impact, even though we have data that shows otherwise. Obviously, the smart, the smart kids, or like the cool kids philosopher, never likes to engage in fact-based arguments when, it doesn't suit him. And ultimately speaking, it doesn't actually cost us as much. If it doesn't cost the state as much as it might cost a parent who is already in poverty. Because when he says like, oh, it doesn't cost that much to feed a kid, like, yeah, maybe for someone whose company can afford to pay fucking Steven Crowder $1 million or however stupid much amount of money they were going to pay, tens of millions a year, it doesn't seem that much. But we know from the Bureau of I think not labor statistics, but of agriculture that tracks this kind of food nutrition stuff, that the average cost of raising a kid in middle class household is $13,000 a year. And it's like, that's a lot of money for a family who is already living on the edge to come up with, obviously.